Today on the Daily Dose, clipper ships. Maritime historians maintain that during a 15 to 20 year period that arrived and went nearly in the middle of the 19th century, America became the mistress of the seas. The American flag was seen in every port around the world, which gave American ships the highest freight rates of any nation, primarily because American vessels held all the speed records for sailing the world oceans, all at a time when sailboat racing headlined newspapers around the world, where eager readers followed competing clipper ship captains with as much fervor and passion as NFL football and European soccer fans of today. Unexcelled in size, beauty, sail area, and seaworthiness, American captains were unequaled in their skill, daring, and drive to win, elevating them to the status of rock stars for adoring fans both home and abroad. The term clipper ship is thought to have come from the slang phrase to clip it, which means to move swiftly. Clipper ships were designed for speed at the expense of cargo capacity, employing slender hulls, sharp bows, and flowing graceful lines, which offered the least possible resistance to the water at their bows, creating the least possible drag or inrush of water under their stern, as well as the smallest possible wake or swell as a clipper ship knifed ahead through oftentimes turbulent ocean waters. Representing the highest achievement within the science of naval architecture, the clipper ship's design continues to impact naval, commercial, and private ship and vessel architecture even to this day. The story of the development of the clipper ship is one that reveals, in a striking way, the same qualities of adaptability, alertness, enterprise, and ingenuity, which many people believe to be the same characteristics and qualities that humans wish to aspire to. Beginning with the design, construction, and launch of the Blessing on the Bay, on July 4, 1631, American ship design has been an ever-changing fluid crossroads between creativity and functionality. Owned and built by Governor John Winthrop, the Blessing holds the distinction as the first vessel to be built by a New England forefather. A small bark of about 30 tons burthen, Winthrop used her for pleasure sails to his private island in Boston Harbor, some 2 miles out from Long Wharf, as well as official visits to other settlements within or near the Massachusetts Bay Colony, including Braintree, Weymouth, Hingham, and New Amsterdam. At the time of her construction, colonial forefathers relied on the help of skilled shipwrights from England, who came over in increasing numbers to practice and teach their trade to the colonists. As more and more Americans took up the art of shipbuilding, ship design and construction took on a certain freedom from the conventions taught by British shipwrights, instilling an elasticity of creative expression that would prove to be highly influential on later American ship designs. As colonial shipbuilding grew into an outstanding American industry, ship designers grappled between their hunger for speed and the economic necessities of cargo space. And while speed required narrow hulls with an angular dead-rise bow, carrying capacity called for more beamy full-bodied designs, forcing both requirements to land somewhere in the middle at an agreed-upon point of design neutrality. By the end of the American Revolutionary War, shipbuilding hotspots had developed both in New England and Baltimore, supplying ships for trade routes throughout the world, including the West Indies, the Azores, Mediterranean ports, China, Indian, and the Northwest fur trade. Scores of small ships plied routes up and down the Atlantic seaboard by the turn of the century, including one typical vessel of the time, the America. Launched in Salem in 1804, the America was 114 feet long with a 31-foot beam, a draft of 14 feet, and a weight of 473 tons. Square-rigged throughout, America proved to be the fastest sailing ship of her day, with a top speed of 13 knots and a one-day sailing record of 225 miles. During the War of 1812, the America was repurposed as a privateer with a ship's company of 168 sailors, along with an enormous press of canvas that gave her the capacity to pillage British positions before outsailing British warships in pursuit. While America's enormous sail area made her extremely fast to windward, American ship designers studied French luggers used in the Revolutionary War, which sacrificed everything for a faster sailing ship that could outrun British warships and blockades. The resultant design breakthrough was the schooner-rigged Baltimore clipper, which worked remarkably well to windward with her narrow hull and impressive sail capacity. Winning a lasting fame in maritime history, Baltimore clippers employed raked masts and a low freeboard to reduce visibility, making them so fast that blockade attempts by the British soon became somewhat of a joke with American sailors, at the same time exposing the practical possibilities of increased speeds for merchant vessels to come. A key moment in the evolution of clipper ships came when American shipbuilders began to respond to the growing demand for faster ships in the China tea trade. As British and American merchants sought to improve their competitive edge, the need for speed in shipping became paramount in ship design and performance. Early in the 19th century, tea became one of the most profitable commodities in global trade of the day, while the ability to transport it swiftly from China to Europe or the United States became a pressing requirement. Given the perishable nature of tea, earlier cargo ships such as East Indiamen were too slow and cumbersome to transport the commodity, since voyages lasting months lowered the value of tea by the time it reached ports in Europe and the United States. The resultant new designs brought about the first clipper ships of the 1830s and 40s, featuring long, narrow hulls, sharp bows, and previously unheard of sail area, which allowed them to achieve speeds up to 20 knots under favorable conditions. Some of the most famous early American clippers include the Sea Witch, which set innumerable records, and the Rainbow, considered by many to be the first true clipper ship. British shipwrights soon embraced the clipper design, and by the mid-19th century, competition between American and British clippers became a closely watched and fiercely fought back-and-forth battle for supremacy on the high seas, including some of the fastest British ships, Ariel, Cutty's Sark, and Thermopylae. As competition stiffened, many clipper merchants challenged their skippers and crews to break sailing records held by competitors, leading Captain Joshua Creasy aboard the massive clipper ship Flying Cloud to make a record-setting passage from New York to San Francisco in 1854 in just 89 days and 21 hours, a record that would stand until a racing yacht named Thursday's Child beat Creasy's time by 8 days in 1989. Clipper ships hit a second high gear upon the discovery of gold in California in 1848, triggering a massive migration to the west coast of the United States by men anxious to make it rich. Since the nation at the time lacked a transcontinental railroad, the fastest route was by sea, around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America. Given their unparalleled speed on open ocean waters, clipper ships were ideally suited for the job of transporting 49ers around the Horn, leading to a second ship, the Sovereign of the Seas, to nearly match Flying Cloud's 89-day passage record across the 16,000-mile voyage, at the same time placing the California Gold Rush as a peak high-water moment during the age of clipper ships. Designed for speed and endurance, clipper ships generally required 50 to 60 skilled seamen to handle their complex rigging, while cutting-edge materials and construction techniques helped reduce the weight of clipper ships without compromising strength. The majority of clipper ships were built using high-quality woods such as oak and teak, which provided both durability and flexibility in rough seas. Admired by land lovers and mariners alike, clipper ships were highly regarded for their fine craftsmanship and aesthetic appeal, incorporating sleek profiles and towering masts, which gave them a majestic appearance, often described as greyhounds of the sea. While speed was their defining characteristic, clippers were not without their limitations, such as their susceptibility to unpredictable weather patterns and difficult handling characteristics in storms, leading to numerous accidents and many tragic fatalities. The 19th century also witnessed the involvement of clipper ships in the opium trade, in particular for British clippers sailing between India and China. After the British East India Company monopolized the opium trade, their increasing demands for faster transportation elevated clipper ships to celebrity status as Great Britain addicted the Asian continent with illicit drugs they used in trade for tea, silks, and other coveted goods. Not only did clippers like Red Rover and Perseverance speed up the exchange of opium and products to both China, India, and Europe, but their uncanny speed allowed them to evade Chinese patrols, contributing greatly to the tensions that eventually led to the Opium Wars and China's century of humiliation. Despite their speed, glamour, and celebrity, the era of clipper ships was relatively short-lived, and after the steam engine was made more efficient, safe, and reliable, thanks to improvements in steam engine technology and the expansion of coal refueling stations around the world, by the 1860s, steamships quickly dominated trade routes with their consistent speeds regardless of wind conditions, greater cargo capacity, and dramatic reduction in personnel required to operate them. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 further hastened the decline of clipper ships, since the new waterway shortcut provided a direct route between Europe and Asia, without the need to round Africa's Cape of Good Hope, while the narrow, shallow waters of the canal made deep-draft clipper ships off-limits to the geographic shortcut. The golden age of clipper ships ended with the advent of railroads, first across the Isthmus of Panama and later across the American continent, which stripped profitability from low-capacity clipper ships, while transatlantic communication cables further hastened their demise. As the death knell was ringing on the age of tall ships, Gustav Ericsson built up the last great sailing fleet the world would ever see. Basing his fleet away from large shipping ports like London, Boston, or Los Angeles, Ericsson based his fleet at the tiny port of Maritime, capital of the Åland Islands of Finland. After the Germans' defeat in World War I, Ericsson purchased German clipper ships, which Germany was forced to surrender as payment of war reparations to the Allied nations. Adding substantially to his fleet in the 1920s, when major shipping companies began scrapping their sailing ships, Ericsson focused his windjammers and clipper ships on the grain trade between Australia and Europe around Cape Horn, some of the most challenging sailing conditions in the world, as his ships plied long-haul routes between Port Victoria in Australia to destination ports in Europe. Enthusiastically followed in newspapers throughout Europe and North America, competition among Cape Horners became known as the grain races, as windjammer and clipper ship captains pushed their crews to the limits of speed and endurance to cross agreed-upon finish lines, sometimes as many as 10 to 12 clippers at a time. Rounding the equator, a point halfway between the North and South Poles, at zero latitude known by mariners as the line, rookie sailors were routinely hazed and tarred to celebrate the loss of their sailing virginity during round-trip voyages that could keep a man at sea for upwards of 11 to 12 months at a time. World War II spelled the coming end of the days of clipper ships, when German torpedoes and mines took 8 of Ericsson's windjammers, while still others were seized in foreign ports. Ericsson tried to resurrect his sailing trade after the war with the few ships he had left, but conditions had changed dramatically in an increasingly mechanized world. After his death in 1947, in May of that same year, the last of his clipper ships sailed from Australia on their final voyages. ending centuries of man's passion to ride the wind. And there you have it, clipper ships, today in the Daily Dose. If you enjoyed this short educational video, consider giving the filmmakers a YouTube super thanks from as little as $1, so that you too can feed the filmmakers who feed your brain.